I don't know how to explain what happened. I've been trying to make sense of it, but the more I think about it, the worse it gets. If I hadn't taken pictures, if Emily hadn't been there with me, I'd probably convince myself it was all some kind of hallucination. But it wasn't. It was real, and I don't think I can ignore it anymore. It started with a hobby. Emily and I have always liked weird places. Abandoned buildings, forgotten roadside attractions, places most people drive past without noticing. A couple of years ago, we got into visiting old cemeteries. Not the big ones with perfectly manicured grass and fresh flowers, but the kind that barely show up on maps. The ones that have been swallowed by woods, with cracked headstones and rusted gates leaning so far they might as well fall over. People always assume we're into ghost hunting or some morbid goth phase, but it's nothing like that. We never vandalized anything, never did any dumb rituals. We just liked the quiet. Something about those places felt peaceful, like stepping into a piece of history no one else remembered. We'd take pictures, look up old records if we could find them, and sometimes even track down the histories of the people buried there. It became a regular thing. If we had a free weekend, we'd pick a new state, look for the oldest cemeteries we could find, and spend hours wandering through them. Most of the time, there wasn't much to see. Names worn down to nothing. Whole sections where the headstones had sunk into the dirt. But every once in a while, we'd find something strange. An entire family buried in the same week. A grave with no name. Just a single word like forgotten or unknown, carved into the stone. It never felt creepy though. Not really. At least, not until we found the one that changed everything. That weekend, we were in a small town in Pennsylvania, the kind of place that barely had a gas station. We'd already checked out 2 cemeteries earlier in the day, but Emily had found a third one online. No official name, just a mention on some old genealogy site. No directions, just a set of rough coordinates. We figured we'd check it out before heading home. The road took us deep into the woods, and after a while, it wasn't really a road anymore. Just a dirt path barely wide enough for the car. We parked when it got too rough and walked the rest of the way. The air felt different there. Not just quiet, but wrong. No wind, no birds, not even the usual buzzing of insects. It felt like stepping into a place the world had forgotten. The cemetery wasn't big. Maybe a few dozen graves, all of them old. Most of the stones were broken or half buried under moss, like no one had visited in decades. We split up, wandering through the rows, pointing out anything unusual. Emily found a headstone that just said, Mother, with no dates. I found one with an entire paragraph carved into it, but the letters were so worn down I couldn't read what it said. Then I saw it. A headstone near the edge of the cemetery, almost hidden under ivy. The name on it stopped me cold. It was mine, first and last. Same spelling, everything. I told myself it was just a coincidence, a weird fluke, but then I saw the dates. My exact birth date, and the death date was next week. Emily thought it was funny. She said something about how I must have had a past life or maybe some distant relative with the same name. I tried to laugh it off, but it didn't sit right with me. A shared name was one thing. A shared birth date was another. The death date being a week away felt like the kind of coincidence that wasn't actually a coincidence. I took a picture of the grave, not for any particular reason. Maybe just to prove to myself later that it was real. The stone looked old, but the engraving was still sharp, like it hadn't been worn down like the others. The numbers were too clean. The more I stared at it, the less sense it made. Emily moved on pretty quickly, already wandering toward the next row of graves, but I stood there a little longer. I had this weird feeling, like someone was standing behind me. When I finally turned around, there was no one there. Just the trees, stretching too high, too still. The drive back was quiet. Emily must have picked up on the fact that I wasn't in the mood for jokes anymore. I kept thinking about the grave, the way it had been tucked away like it was waiting for me to find it. That night, my phone started acting weird. At first, I thought it was just lagging. The screen froze while I was scrolling, and when it finally unfroze, I saw a timer at the top of the screen. It was counting down from an hour. Before I could figure out what it was, it disappeared. I checked my apps, notifications, everything. Nothing. A few minutes later, another one popped up. This one said, 6 days, 14 hours, 22 minutes. It vanished before I could take a screenshot. I turned my phone off and back on. I checked for updates, ran a virus scan. Everything was normal. Emily was already asleep, so I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe some weird bug or some app running in the background. I put my phone face down on the nightstand and tried to sleep. At some point during the night, I woke up to the sound of whispering. My brain was still half asleep, but I could hear it. A low voice, just outside the edge of my hearing. It sounded close, too close. It was saying something over and over, but I couldn't make out the words. I turned my head toward Emily, expecting her to be whispering in her sleep. But it wasn't her. The sound was coming from the nightstand, from my phone. I reached for it, but as soon as I touched it, the whispering stopped. The screen was off. No notifications, no calls. I stared at my reflection in the black screen, the shape of my face warped by the darkness. The next morning I told myself it was a dream. That's all it had to be. We had already planned to visit another cemetery in the next town over, so we packed up, got breakfast, and drove out early. I tried not to think about the grave, or the phone, or the whispering. I convinced myself it was all in my head. It was fine. Everything was fine. Then we got to the cemetery, and I saw it again. A different headstone, different shape, different font, but my name, my birth date, and the same death date. At first, I didn't say anything about the second grave. Emily hadn't noticed it, and I wasn't sure I wanted her to. If I pointed it out, she'd try to come up with some rational explanation, and I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to explain how I knew it wasn't a coincidence. I just took another picture, stood there for a second too long, and walked away. That should have been the end of it. I told myself we'd go home, and I'd forget about it. But that wasn't what happened. The next cemetery we visited, I saw him. At first, I thought it was just another visitor, some guy walking through the rows of headstones like we were. He was standing near a tree at the edge of the cemetery, hands in his pockets, like he was waiting for someone. He was too far away for me to see his face. Something about him felt off though. He wasn't moving, just standing there, too still. I looked away for a second. When I looked back, he was gone. Emily didn't notice him. She was busy taking pictures of an angel statue covered in ivy. I told myself I imagined it. Maybe some random guy who had just walked away while I wasn't looking. But then I saw him again. A different cemetery, different town. He was standing at the far end of the graveyard, facing me. I couldn't see his face, but I could see his clothes. Same jacket, same jeans, same shoes, exactly like mine. I turned to get Emily's attention. When I looked back, he wasn't there anymore. It kept happening. Every time we visited a new cemetery, he was there, never up close, never moving, just standing in the distance, waiting, always in the same clothes, standing the same way. I tried to point him out to Emily once, but he was already gone before she could look. She started joking that I was seeing ghosts. I laughed, but it didn't feel funny. The graves weren't stopping either. Every few cemeteries, I'd find another one with my name and the same death date. Sometimes the headstones looked old, covered in moss. Other times, they looked newer, like someone had put them there recently. I started checking cemetery records, trying to find out who was buried in those plots. Nothing. No records, no names, nothing online. It was like the graves didn't exist until I found them. Then I got the voicemail. It showed up late at night, no caller ID, just a notification that I had a new message. I almost didn't check it, but something about it made my stomach drop. I put it on speaker. It was my own voice, not just similar, not just close, my exact voice. Flat, emotionless, like someone had recorded me saying something when I wasn't paying attention. You can't stop it. That's all it said. 4 words, my own voice. Then silence. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone. I didn't tell Emily. I didn't delete it. I didn't do anything. I just sat there, listening to it over and over, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. I needed answers. I convinced Emily to go back to the first cemetery, the one deep in the woods where this all started. She didn't understand why, but I told her I just wanted to see it again. Maybe figure out why that headstone was even there. I didn't tell her that I needed to know if it was still there at all. The drive felt longer this time. The road was just as bad. Winding dirt paths, trees closing in on both sides. When we finally got there, the place looked exactly the same. Same overgrown grass, same broken stones half buried in moss. But when I walked over to the spot where my grave had been, it was gone. Not vandalized, not knocked over, just gone. There was nothing there but dirt and leaves, no sign there had ever been a headstone at all. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the empty space. I pulled out my phone, opened the picture I had taken of the grave. Same spot, same background. It had been right there. But now, there was nothing. Emily didn't say much on the way back. She kept glancing at me, like she was waiting for me to say something. When we stopped for gas, she finally spoke. She wanted to stop. The cemeteries, the road trips, all of it. She said it wasn't fun anymore. That I was acting weird, distracted. She didn't say she was scared, but I could hear it in her voice. She didn't want to do this anymore. I didn't blame her, but I couldn't stop. The countdowns on my phone got worse. At first, they only popped up once in a while, random timers appearing for a few seconds before disappearing. Now, they were everywhere. I'd open my messages, and there'd be a number hidden between the words like my phone was glitching. 4 days, 3 hours. I'd check my search history and see entries I didn't remember making. Just numbers. No links, no websites, just countdowns. I tried factory resetting my phone. It didn't help. The numbers kept coming back. Then the dreams started. I was in a cemetery, digging. The dirt was loose, too easy to move, like someone had already been there before me. I didn't want to keep going, but I couldn't stop. I knew what I was going to find, and I kept digging anyway. When I finally hit the coffin, I already knew what was inside. It was me. Rotten skin peeling away, eyes sunken, mouth frozen in a half smile like it had been expecting me. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I just stood there, staring at myself, waiting for it to move. Then its mouth opened, and I woke up. The man was waiting for me the next time we visited a cemetery. I saw him standing near the tree line, same as always. But this time, I didn't look away. I didn't blink. I walked towards him. I could hear Emily calling my name, asking what I was doing, but I didn't stop. He didn't move. He just stood there, waiting. And then I saw his face. Mine. Not just similar. Not just a passing resemblance. My exact face staring back at me. Same eyes, same nose, same scar on my chin from when I fell off my bike as a kid. I opened my mouth to say something, but before I could, he was gone. Not like he ran, not like he turned and walked away. 1 second he was there, the next, he wasn't. Just empty space where he had been standing, like he had never been there at all. I stopped going to cemeteries. It didn't matter anymore. The graves weren't the problem. The countdowns weren't the problem. The man, the thing, with my face wasn't even the problem. The problem was that the date was getting closer, and I couldn't do anything about it. I spent hours searching online, digging through forms, archives, anything that might give me an answer. I kept thinking someone, somewhere, had to have gone through this before. This wasn't just some coincidence. It wasn't some elaborate prank. It was happening for a reason. And then I found something. It was an old forum post buried deep in a thread from years ago. Someone describing exactly what I was going through. They visited cemeteries. They started seeing their name on graves. They saw someone watching them from a distance. They got weird messages. They heard their own voice saying things they didn't remember saying. And then they disappeared. The last post was from someone else. Does anyone know what happened to OP? They went missing on the date from the graves. I checked the date. It matched. The exact same day as mine. I don't remember how long I sat there, staring at the screen. I don't even remember closing my laptop. I just remember feeling like something inside me had shifted. Like I had finally reached the part where I was supposed to understand what was happening. But I still didn't. I checked my phone. The countdown was still there. 3 days, 7 hours, 42 minutes. I thought about running, about leaving town, getting on a plane, disappearing somewhere no one could find me. But I knew it wouldn't matter. You can't outrun something that's already inside you. Because that's what it was. I started noticing little things. When I looked in the mirror, my reflection didn't look quite right. Not anything obvious. Just a tiny difference in the way my mouth curved or the way my eyes held my gaze a second too long. I tried to ignore it, but it was getting worse. Then there was my voice. I played an old video of myself just to check. It sounded normal, but when I recorded myself speaking and played it back, something was off. It was still my voice, but it wasn't. The tone was too flat, the pacing just a little wrong, like I was hearing an impression of myself. Emily started noticing things too. She stopped arguing about the cemeteries. She stopped trying to convince me I was just imagining it. And then one night, she woke up and found me standing in the middle of the room. I don't remember getting up. I don't remember moving. But I was standing there, facing the wall, whispering. She told me she said my name, but I didn't respond. She got out of bed, walked closer, asked me what I was saying, and then she heard my voice. It wasn't my voice. It was deeper, slower, like something trying to sound like me but not getting it right. I don't know how long I stood there like that. I don't know how long she stood there listening. But when she finally touched my shoulder, I stopped. She said I turned around and looked at her, but I didn't say anything. I just smiled, and then I went back to bed, like nothing happened. The night before the date, I told Emily I was going back. She didn't try to argue this time. She just said she was coming with me. The drive felt longer than it should have, like the road itself was stretching out, trying to keep us from getting there. Neither of us spoke much. I kept checking my phone, watching the numbers tick down. 5 hours, 12 minutes. When we finally arrived, I knew something was wrong. The cemetery wasn't the same. The last time we were here, it had been overgrown, abandoned. Now the grass was cut short, the paths were cleared, the tombstones looked new. We walked to the spot where my grave had been. Nothing. No stone, no marker, just an empty patch of dirt. Emily looked at me, waiting for some kind of explanation. I didn't have one. This was where it had been. I had the picture to prove it, but now it was like it had never been there at all. I checked my phone. 2 hours, 47 minutes. The timer wasn't stopping. I felt it before I saw it. A shift in the air, like pressure dropping before a storm. I turned around. He was there. The man, the thing, with my face. He stood just beyond the tree line, watching. Emily didn't see him, but I did. I walked toward him. For the first time, he didn't disappear. The air around me felt colder, heavier, like stepping into a place I wasn't supposed to be. My phone slipped from my hand, hit the ground, screen shattering on impact. The countdown kept running. 1 hour, 3 minutes. And then he smiled, and I understood. I had never been meant to die. I had been meant to be choose. I don't know how I knew what to do, but I did. I took one more step forward and said, no. Out loud, clear, final. The man's expression didn't change, but I felt the shift, like a thread snapping, like the air around us exhaled. He didn't vanish, he didn't attack. He just stepped back into the trees, into the dark. And then he was gone. The pressure in my head disappeared. The cold faded. I could breathe again. I turned back to Emily. She was staring at me, confused, like she knew something had just happened, but couldn't see it. I picked up my phone. The countdown was gone, and I knew somehow that it was over. We left the cemetery and never went back. The nightmares stopped. The countdowns never returned. I stopped seeing my name on graves. But sometimes, when I pass by an old cemetery, I get this feeling, like someone is watching, like a choice is waiting to be made. And I wonder what would have happened if I had stepped forward instead of saying no.